Hello. The Divine Code reading for November 7th, pages 305 and 306. We are today finishing up the chapter Permissions and Prohibitions commanded the Gentiles regarding meat. Species for which meat from a living animal is forbidden. Topic number 13. Meat from a human, whether separated while the person was alive or after the person's death, was never permitted to be eaten, neither to Adam, nor to Noah, nor to their descendants. Yad Elihu, chapter 45, Malbin on Leviticus 11:4. This is apparent from the commandments to Adam and Noah. Since Adam was given permission to rule over the animals but not to eat them, and surely he was forbidden to rule over by an act of kidnapping and to injure a human for the purpose of eating the person. So Adam did not have permission. Okay, Adam had a dominion, however that's understood. He had dominion over the animals, but yet he didn't have permission to eat the animals. So it's assumed that the way it's explained here, and the way it's going to be explained here, is that in order to eat something, the person first has to have dominion over it. So Adam, even though he had dominion over the animals, he wasn't allowed to eat the animals, or he wasn't allowed to kill the animals for food, however that's understood. In that case, when Adam did not have dominion, and humans have never had the permission to have dominion over another human. That's a major part of the Noahide Code. It's one of the background logic behind the Noahide Code. It's, understanding the Noahide Code is that definitely in that case, a person would not have the ability to eat a human. The understanding is that first a person would have to have dominion before they would be able to eat. When God later gave permission to Noah to rule over the animals, that's another way of saying dominion, the prohibition against ruling over humans still stood. See Hitzkuni on Genesis 9:5. This commandment to Adam was given in the form of the positive commandment in Genesis 2:16. You may not eat from all the trees of the field, to the exclusion of all non-vegetarian food. So Adam was given permission to eat from the field, the trees of the field, except for the one tree, but the trees of the field, and that gave him permission to eat vegetation. But it did not give him permission to eat anything else. See footnote 5 above, where this distinction is explained. It appears, however, that there is no direct prohibition against eating the flesh of a human carcass. Okay, so there's no actual prohibition. There's nothing that says don't eat from a human flesh. It's understood logically from these other commandments. You take the other commandments and realize that Adam only had permission to eat the vegetation. Noah only had permission to eat the animals. And human flesh was never given permission, therefore, logically, it would be prohibited, even though it doesn't say directly that it's prohibited. Nevertheless, this act might be considered a type of ruling over another human and is not permitted. It may also lead to the sin of cannibalism. God forbid. when it says cannibalism, it's referring to killing a person for the sake of eating the food. So kidnapping is one way of understanding taking dominion over another person. And there is understood that kidnapping is prohibited. Now that's in a yet unpublished section of the Divine Code. So how they make the argument that kidnapping, the prohibition of kidnapping applies to Gentiles, we'll just take it on faith that that's what they're going to explain in the later part of the Divine Code when that part gets published. However, it is forbidden to injure a person, and this will be explained in part 5, chapter 6. That's on the prohibition against murder. And therefore, there is justification to forbid human blood, since permitting it may lead one to cause human injury. So that might also be a logical reason to say that the human flesh is prohibited, because if they allow human flesh, then it might lead to injuring a person or killing a person to get the flesh. And similar to, this is just another layer of logic beyond the dominion issue, which is a very serious issue. Also, it might lead to causing a person to injure or to murder someone for that. So the blood is also included. Blood is not considered a issue of dominion over another person the way that flesh would be, because blood is easily reproduced. However, it's still, it can lead to causing injury, so it would be prohibited as like a fence, as like a rabbinic fence. It is allowed to benefit from part of a human corpse, a Gentile corpse, if there is definite need. Many have questioned the permissibility and morality in plasticization of skinned and dissected human corpses for purposes of monetary profit and public display. This can be found in museums. It can also be found in kind of a sideshow type of thing, which is rather disgusting. The question is whether it's how it's viewed according to biblical law for non-Jews, whether that's permitted. It is forbidden for Jewish bodies, which must be buried. So the requirement that the Jewish body be buried, therefore, things like plasticization, using the human corpse in a museum or medical display or something, whether that would be prohibited for a Jewish corpse. The question is whether it's prohibited for a non-Jewish corpse. In the author's opinion, it is both immoral and in desecration of the divine image within any person, and should be considered in Torah law as comparable to cannibalism, which is not permitted. Now here cannibalism is being given a different definition. In footnote 35, which we just read, cannibalism, the way it's described, we don't allow the eating of human flesh because it might lead to cannibalism. Well, then obviously eating human flesh is not considered to cannibalism. It's killing a person for the sake of eating the human flesh, which is being, logically, that has to be what's being called cannibalism in footnote 35. Therefore, but here it appears that treating the divine image with disrespect is comparable to cannibalism. It seems to be a different definition of cannibalism, that would not be the murdering the person for the sake of the flesh, but rather consuming the flesh. That would be similar to It's a disrespectful way of handling the human corpse, is what's being said here. So it'd be a different definition of cannibalism between these two parts. For example, for medical training or research or organ transplants. Since Gentiles are not commanded that they must be buried in the earth. Now, in the Jewish law, it's explained that there's a Jewish commandment to be buried in the earth. That law was written in such a way that it's understood to be for the Jewish people. It doesn't necessarily apply to the non-Jews. It could be inferred that that's the proper thing to do. It's just that we don't have the direct biblical command in this regard. The option is open because there's not a direct biblical command. The option is open to plan for donation of organs after one's own passing, or the passing of a Gentile relative who has become legally has become legally responsible for. So because there's no biblical commandment to be buried in the ground, and that makes it not proper for a Jewish person to donate their organ because it's supposed to be buried in the ground. A non-Jew does not have that biblical command, therefore it's possible for a non-Jew to donate their organs. However, it must be noted that God's Torah defines life as the beating of the heart. Therefore, a Gentile who wishes to be an organ donor is encouraged to make it clear and legally binding stipulation, which may be in a so-called living will, that no organs may be removed and no life support mechanisms may be disconnected if they have already been applied before the heart has permanently stopped beating. This is explained in more detail in part 5, that's on the laws of murder, topics chapter 1, topics 15 to 18, and chapter 7, topic 8. So the biblical law, and this is for non-Jews as well as for Jews, is that the beating of the heart is the definition of what when a person is alive or dead is based upon whether or not his heart is beating. If the person's heart is beating, then it would be prohibited to take an organ out that would lead to the person's dying. Now, the person's already dying. We assume the person's already dying. This is a case wherein the doctors say the guy's almost dead, and certain organs it's required to be removed before the person is dead, like the heart. Well, once the heart stops beating, then the heart will start deteriorating right away. So if they want to transplant the heart, they really need to take it out while it's still beating, which technically that means the person's still alive, and that would be considered, taking the heart out would be considered murder, which makes heart transplant surgery technically that would be considered murder when they take the heart out, and therefore be prohibited as murder. There's other organs that can be taken out. And so if a person is giving the doctor permission to take organs out, in Torah law, it's required that they only be given permission, the doctors are only given permission to take the organs out after the heart has stopped beating, which creates difficulties for doctors, but that's the way the Torah is written, and that's the way God created things to function. Also, in regard to removing, taking the person off the machine, if the machine has not been put on, if the person's not on the machine, there's no requirement to put the person on the machine. However, once they're put on the machine, if taking the person off the machine is leads to their dying, then it's prohibited by Torah law to take them off the machine, because that would be considered the final act of killing a person. And this is explained in more detail, in a fair amount of detail, in the under the laws of murder. It's covered in a future part of the book. From Ethics of the Fathers, that's Mishnah Tavot, chapter 3:14. Rabbi Akiva used to say, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the divine image. It is even a greater act of love that it was made known to him that he was created in the divine image. As it states, in the image of God was man created." Genesis 1:27. This refers to all mankind, since the quoted verse in Genesis refers to all the descendants of Noah. A practical lesson that results from this is that the human body should not be treated disrespectfully, even in death. We learn from Genesis 3:19 that the most respectful treatment for a human corpse is burial. So because God created man in his image, and this is sealed by God informing us that we were created God's image. It's not just that we were created God's image and then kind of left on our own, but we were actually told this. And because we're told this, therefore, we have a responsibility to behave correctly, behave and respect each other. And that includes respecting ourselves, and we should be the ideal way to be buried is to be buried in the ground. Even though it's not a commandment, it's still the preferred way. You know, today, I work in the cemetery industry, and I'm not even sure if people are buried in the ground. They're buried in sealed caskets and are placed in sealed concrete boxes that I'm not sure if the ground ever actually reaches the person for hundreds of years, but that's the way it's considered ideal. Ideally, the person would be placed in the gunny sack directly in the dirt, but we do the best we can, and it's proper. That's the proper way to bury a person, is in the ground. Chatan Sofer Yeridea, chapter 3:36, and Igrit Moshe Yeridea 2:29 ruled that it is not forbidden to derive benefit from a Gentile corpse. Some types of benefits may be forbidden, however, based on the reasoning discussed in the early footnote 35, which was the footnote earlier part of today's reading. So, while there's no biblical commandment not to benefit from a non-Jewish corpse, it has to be done logically. It has to be done respectfully. The respect for the human corpse is the kind of driving aspect to today's reading, to the items in today's reading. And if the person can give organs in a respectful manner, that's good. They'll donate their body to medical research in a respectful manner, that's good. And the fear of God needs to be on anybody who is involved in working with these things, and using it for consumption would definitely be forbidden, except in the case of saving, in extreme cases where person's a plane crash in the Andes, or someone's on a life raft or something, and what is unspeakable has to happen. Then people have to do survival is more important. But beyond that, in every case, the respect, and even in that case, the respect of the divine image is very important. Thank you.